The Jersey Devil is clearly well known. There are reports from all over North America and even other countries describing the creature. He is described as a bipedal hoofed animal with bat-like wings. They are known as gargoyles, demons, cryptids, but their appearance seems to have remained the same. I'll share two cases where the creatures in question were simply referred to deer dragons or deer bats. In June 1996, Lynn Johnson was driving through the Cottage Grove area when something strange crossed the road in front of her. Cottage Grove is in Wisconsin, Oregon, and Minnesota. I can't tell you which state this story comes from as it is not specified. The creature moved in a leaping motion and appeared to reach speeds of 70 miles per hour. Suddenly, at an acute angle, it opened its wings, which seemed too small to support its body, before it immediately took off into the black night sky and disappeared. Johnson thought that the creature she saw must have been supernatural in nature, specifically because of its wing size. That was a short story. But next, Dalton and his friend Nick were driving around northern Illinois. As the day progressed, they decided to head out to some secluded country roads to do some drifting and joyriding. They did that quite often. According to Dalton, it was really just typical behavior for a 16-year-old with a sports car. 2 hours later, it was around 11 p.m. and the pair were still driving around. They were on a small gravel road surrounded by farmland, and it must have been quite barren, especially at this time of night. But there were houses here and there. Nick and Dalton chat and goof off as Dalton repeatedly brakes and slams on the gas pedal hard to get the vehicle sideways on this straight road. The gravel road was lined on either side by dense fields of corn, and the stalks rose about head height. As the growing season came to an end, as Dalton began to brake his car for what he estimated to be the 5th time, he suddenly noticed a vibration in the corn. He and Nick both fell silent and began to watch the strange movement, waiting for a herd of deer to break out and run across the road. Accordingly, Dalton slowed his car to allow the expected approaching herd pass without incident. The corn shook violently, and the source of the movement was visibly approaching the road quickly. The friends were shocked and fearful at this point. About 8 feet in front of Dalton's car, the corn suddenly opened and something pushed its way out. Dalton doesn't know how to describe it, but he knows it scared him to the core. At first glance, the thing looked like a black deer and was about the size of a big buck. Dalton's headlights were aimed at the exact place where the creature appeared, so he specifies the scene was well lit. Leaping out of the dense field, it suddenly opened its huge wings and took to the air. Never landing from its leap, it flew directly in front of the car and quickly performed an insect-like zigzag movement quickly before shooting up into the sky as if it had been put into a cannon and shot into the sky. Both teenagers immediately turned their heads skyward to look through the top of the car, hoping to catch a glimpse of the monster and find out where it had disappeared to. However, Dalton's headlights were pointed straight ahead and the sky was pitch black, so nothing could be seen. In a blind panic, Dalton floored the car while Nick begged him to go. Speeding down the gravel road as fast as they could while maintaining control, the boys fled the scene, driving for a good 15 minutes until they felt they could reach safety. All while they watched for the creature, an utter terror, for although there was only about 30 seconds between the first movement of the corn and its ascent into the sky, they were inexplicably convinced that the creature was chasing them. Finally, they stopped on a road where there were more people. Farmers could be seen driving their tractors in the surrounding fields. The presence of other people made the boys feel safer. Dalton decided to pull over to the side of the road, and the boys immediately asked the obvious question, what the hell was that? But they could not give each other satisfactory answers. They called it deer bat because it was apparently the size of a deer but flew like a bat. Although about the size of a moose, it was apparently humanoid in shape and so completely black that it appeared to be covered in tar. Dalton claimed that while he was sure that what he saw had 4 limbs and a pair of wings, he could not tell if they were all legs or if there was also a pair of arms. After calming down, they noticed a harvest in progress sign in a field a few meters away, so being dumb teenagers, they decided to steal it. Dalton ran into the field and grabbed it before quickly packing it into the back of the car and covering it with his hoodies. Of course, it was a large metal sign with very noticeable posts sticking out of it, so it was quite visible in the back of the car. However, they managed to flee the area with it and decided to stop at a gas station in a nearby town of New Milford, where they were both thirsty and wanted a snack. Dalton backed the car into the parking lot of a gas station off the main road, and not minutes after turning off the engine, an old rusty Chevy drove in front of them, effectively blocking them. The windows of the mysterious vehicle were blacked out, so the boys couldn't tell who was driving it or what happened. Obviously scared, the boys decided to stay in the car and wait for a few minutes with the Chevy in front of them. They felt they had been through enough that night, so they didn't want to start a conflict. The car in front of them apparently did nothing for a few minutes before taking off and disappearing into the night. The boys probably thought it might be someone who saw them steal the sign and write down their license plate, but it made no sense because the Chevy entered on the boys' left and exited on the right, meaning there was never a chance to read their license plate behind them, as there was no plate in front of the car. After the mystery man left, the friends went to the gas station and bought themselves chips and drinks before driving back to Dalton's house to sleep. Of course, Dalton has no idea if the mysterious black truck was connected to any other unusual events that night, but he still thought it was creepy. The best he can describe the creature is to compare it to the creeper from Jeepers Creepers, and only later when he watched a documentary that mentioned the Mothman, he realized that apart from the glowing red eyes, it looked like the deer bat he saw that night. Black stickmen are one of the most unusual paranormal creatures ever reported. Stickmen, sometimes closely related to similar shadow figures, are more of a modern phenomena, with the earliest sightings only dating back 20 years after the dawn of the internet. Stickmen are usually described just as that, crude figures appearing like simple drawings. They are said to be quite tall, sometimes over 7 feet. In addition to their expected thinness, as the name suggests, they are usually black and have simplistic forms, often described as having no visible facial features. Most alleged encounters are not very clear, and often stick figures appear briefly in the witness's peripheral vision. Behaviorally, they are usually described as being shy or otherwise cautious around people. There is currently no verifiable evidence of the existence of these creatures, Although there are few alleged photos and videos online, almost all of them are known to be fabricated. As such, knowledge of these beings is limited to eyewitness accounts. Those who believe in their existence usually consider them to be some kind of interdimensional visitor. Skeptics generally believe they are the product of an overactive imagination. This notion is perhaps supported by the fact that most sightings occur in dark places and in the corner of the eye of the witness. The fact that the alleged sightings only began with the creation of the internet indicates that the alleged sightings were probably heavily influenced by general cultural spread. One account reads, in 1982, when I was a student nurse at a hospital in Brentwood, England, walking home one evening, I encountered a stick person on the grounds of the hospital. It slyly moved across the road after apparently being pressed against a wall as it was trying to remain unspotted. It stopped when it saw me and raised its hands in fear and quickly walked off into the forest. It was very tall and very thin, very long arms and legs, and a very small oval head, all black and no clothes to be seen. I could not see the face, although it seemed to be very close to the streetlight and so well lit. I was scared, and to this day no one believes me. Another person shares, you know, my sister told me that she also saw a stick man when she was a child at the time. At the time, it was our aunt's funeral, and she was sitting outside when she noticed a strange stick-like person walking back and forth over the electric wiring of the post. She got very scared and told her cousin to look at it. Our relative didn't believe her, but after a few minutes he also saw the stickman and both got scared. Our cousin asked his mother if she saw the stickman, but she hadn't. It lasted several hours. It was noon until dawn before it faded away. She told me this story and I had my doubts when I saw an article with people discussing their encounters, and I was like, wow. I never thought that many people have seen stickmen around the world. I thought my sister was just crazy. Another user writes, the following account is slightly shortened, but otherwise unchanged, and is from my diary for Tuesday, October 31st, 1978. Only the names have been changed. We were all about 15 to 17 years old then. This took place in Kent. My journal also specifies that there was a new moon that night. I will record a rather unpleasant experience which happened this evening. A group of about 10 were sitting together around midnight. After about 45 minutes, Will jumped up, banging his head, saying he had a bee in his hair. He looked quite terrified. Both Dorothy and I could see a tall, thin figure wearing a hat dancing behind him. Will later said that there was an awfully loud buzzing going on in his head, but only Rachel could hear the buzzing. We told ourselves it must be a beehive, so we moved forward a little. As we pulled back, Dorothy and I saw a ring in the grass surrounding where we were sitting. Eventually it started raining, so we went back to Rachel's house. As we left, I turned and saw the same thin black figure walking across the trees to where we were sitting. We sat in Rachel's bedroom for a while when I looked over to Will while he was reading and saw an amorphous black blob fall from his hair onto the bed. I was the only one who saw it. A few seconds later, the black shape began to whiz around. In total, about 4 people saw this, of course scaring us. Afterwards, the girls slept in a room together. Rachel and Molly apparently saw a black spot on the curtains during the night. I slept great, though. When I first woke up, I saw a thin black figure against the wardrobe doors. I have to admit I lost my cool that night and was obviously horrified by the whole thing. I've moved out of the southeast now, but I see Will from time to time. Even 20 years later, he was extremely reluctant to discuss the events of that night in detail, as he remembers it unsettlingly. In our last meeting, I got a little more from his account. He was unaware of the thin figure I saw behind him during the initial buzzing. Without prompting from me, he remembered that a black blob fell from his hair, which I thought he never noticed. However, he remembers that it fell on the pages of the book he was reading, rather than on the bed as I remembered. Will also remembers one of the girls' stories about this night. Apparently, the blob repeatedly appeared near the curtains and moved them, reflecting a bright light that seemed to come from outside, but did not correspond to any street lights and probably no car lights. This was the only supernatural experience of my life. Texas stilt-walkers, also known as striders, are large cryptids reported primarily, but not exclusively, from the southwestern United States, especially Texas. Reports of them began appearing online around 2008, although they are said to have presence in South Texas folklore. They are characterized by their enormous size, stick-thin bodies, and elongated legs that reach far above the trees and easily step over houses. The head is distinguished by two piercing headlamp-like eyes. The head is sometimes described as dog-like. In one report, a stilt walker was seen descending from a vertical cliff with ease, like a giant spider climbing a wall. No others have been observed with this ability, but others have suggested that the creature is not entirely flesh and blood, but supernatural, sometimes even described as two-dimensional. Some see it as evil, a predatory creature whose appearance is an omen of tragedy, but all known eyewitnesses peacefully interacted or simply observed the creature without signs of aggression. A 2013 account reads, I was at my grandmother's ranch this weekend with my two cousins, and I was walking the two dogs on the property off leash. It was evening, but not so late that it was too dark to see. The sky was about halfway to the orange part of the sunset. We walked through the cow pasture to the barbed wire fence gate that I think is about 4 feet high and separates it from the wooded area. We basically walked along the path with the fence and trees on the right and the cow watering lake on the left. The dogs were a little ahead of us when suddenly both turned behind us and started barking. My cousin and I both turned around and saw some sort of creature like a horse or dog, covered in long, shaggy, black or dark brown fur and very long legs. I would say the head and body were somewhere between the size of a large dog and a small horse, but the legs were easily twice the length of a human. I don't know how long it was there, but it was watching us and the dogs and was mostly frozen and was on our side of the barbed wire fence away from the woods. I'm guessing it had just walked straight over the fence, heard the dogs barking, and froze. The dog started running towards it. It seemed to kneel on its humongous legs and bring its head to the ground. It made this massive snorting noise, and both dogs stopped and bolted straight into the lake. My cousin said they yelped like they were hurt, but I don't remember that. Then it turned and walked over the fence back into the woods. I honestly don't remember what we did, but I don't think we screamed or anything. I think we just kind of froze up. When I was gone, we bolted back to the ranch and told my grandma. She was sort of dismissive of the whole thing and said there were all sorts of animals out there and didn't want to bother the sheriff with it. She was treating it like we got scared by a deer and our minds were playing tricks on us or something. But we all agreed it didn't even jump to clear the fence. It just walked over like it was nothing. And we all saw that it had very long hair. That's honestly it. Not overly paranormal, but certainly terrifying. Someone responds dismissively saying it's a moose, which the storyteller responds with, I live in Texas. I don't think we have those around here. I guess it could have been someone's pet that escaped, but I'm not going to deny the idea that panic made some errors in her perception. Cousins and I couldn't agree whether it had visible ears or not. For example, on the other hand, we all agreed this fucker was at least twice as tall as a person, and none of us saw antlers. Others assure the user they aren't the only one with an experience like this. I saw one of these. I was riding my bike down a street with no houses or street lights at 3 a.m. and it chased me until I finally made it back to the next street that had lights. My bike's computer's max speed went from 20 to 28 that day. My legs were on fire and I went straight home and cried. A user questions, maybe that's what I hit coming back home last year. No one believes me, but as I got in the left lane to pass a semi going 80, I see this big thing in the road. It looked like a hairless, huge dog horse thing. I couldn't do anything but go over it. I messed my car up, but I was able to make it the 6 hours home. Damn thing sucked. I was able to flag down a trucker who had tools to take off the hanging plastics from the bumper. The original poster responds asserting if it was hairless, it wasn't the same thing. Another user writes, wow, I've seen the same thing. I live in San Antonio, Texas. I was walking home taking a shortcut through the woods with a friend, and kind of like you guys said, it was along a tree-lined path, but the path is like a bit elevated and on the other side is just a huge slope. So we see this thing in front of us on the path and it notices us and runs down this huge like 20-foot steep slope and darts across the field on the other side. Like no problem. It was amazing how much distance it could cover in such a short time, and silent too, but it scared the shit out of me and my friend. I've done a bit of research on these things, and there isn't a lot of hard info, mostly just witnesses' stories and such, but one thing I did notice is that they are usually sighted in wooded areas along a path or hills and slope areas with woods. I think they are nocturnal and their long legs makes hill climbing easy. There are surprisingly even more encounters. In 2011 at an army base in a dark near wooded area, there was a street light near my house. At the time I was taking dogs out to pee. They were usually docile, calm couch potatoes, but they started growling, back hair rising. I looked to the left of me near the streetlight. A huge, long-legged, long, shaggy deer-like animal walks out of the light. I have no idea how long I stood there, but the dogs eventually relax and do their thing. I know a lot of messed up stuff happened out on this base. I don't consider myself a mystic or anything like that, but there is a creepy feeling in certain parts around here at night. Perhaps these creatures are some sort of guardians of the woods or something. It reminds me of that one dude who made Spirited Away, the movie with the wolf girl who had this deer human face thingy. That's what the creature I saw looked like to me, but then again it was a split second. Someone shares a depiction of the Texas stilt walker, and the original poster confirms it looks just like what they saw. An account from 2014 reads, 3 times in the past year in my travels, I have seen something unusual. In the wooded area in the small town of Louisberry, it looks like a Texas stilt walker. Driving home late one night, I noticed something walking on the road. It was very tall looking, over 6 feet, and very thin, either in black jeans or a black coat or a very closely trimmed black fur coat. Its face did not have a muzzle, but it was flat like a humanoid. His face was also black. It walked briskly on two legs, and as I approached it, dropped down and quickly ran across the road in front of me. I saw the thing a second time, a few months later, running down the road on all fours before it ran into the corn on the side of the road. The third time it was just a glimpse of a shadow, but it seemed to be the same shape, so I'm not so sure. Without giving a full description, I mentioned it somewhat vaguely on Facebook. Two other people described the appearance and behavior exactly. One spotted it almost exactly where I did. The other spotted about 6 to 7 miles away. A user responds with their story. My mom and sister have always been the truth-telling type. I wasn't there to experience it firsthand, and honestly, I probably would have been too young to care, but they have a similar experience. My mother was driving my sister, who was younger than I was at the time, 5 or 6, home from our dance studio. It was just beginning to get dark. They were going down a dirt road in the middle of nowhere in Michigan, and both of them swear they saw a Black Panther-like figure jump across the hood of their vehicle. They were traveling about 30 miles per hour, but the thing just took off and ran up an incline on the side of the road into the woods. They were both fairly shaken up about it, and my mother was practically in tears when I heard her describe it to my dad. Now that you mention it, I have another story relating to this that dates back quite a while ago. I'll continue if anyone wants to hear it. No one responded, and the user did not tell their story. Another encounter from the fall of 2012 reads, I was born in and I still live in Louisville, Pennsylvania. Most nights than not, I'll drive up to New Cumberland for a cold beer and some darts. And one night in October 2012 was no different. On the return trip, and not long after midnight, I was headed east towards Louisville. I saw someone walking towards me on the side of the road. Granted, it was late, but it was pretty warm October, so it wasn't out of the question that someone might be walking down the road. The strange thing was quite tall, 6'6" or taller, and very thin indeed. With seconds of looking at him, I noticed that he appeared to be dressed in entirely black pants, a tight-fitting black trench coat, very, very dark skin, and short dark hair. He either limped or had difficulty walking. As I debated slowing down, maybe somebody was in an accident, he dropped to all fours and quickly skipped across the road in front of me. He has a face that was, as I said, pitch black and a cross between a man and a dog, and then he was gone. Someone adds, I first started encountering this thing roughly 6 years ago when I moved out here. In that time, I have done a few things to try to figure out what it was or prove it is here. I have come to recognize that anything official is being suppressed. I have sent 2 snaggles of hair off for DNA processing via the local college, Southern Illinois University. One was lost, the other came back as a possum. However, I'm 100% sure that it was not the hair of a possum. I sent up motion-sensing video recording devices for a couple of years, but it has exceptionally long limbs, and I only have a few strange swooshes captured. These days I have come to expect that I will find many small to medium deceased creatures on my property, and that it doesn't seem to bother with the cows, rather it seems to interact with them. We just call it the stilt walker and live well enough in harmony with it. But the only member of my family to have a close encounter with it is my great uncle. 2 years ago in the middle of the winter, he was pushing out a large round bale for some of the cows. In their rush, the cows pushed him to the ground, which broke his hip. He was completely stuck on the ground and miles out and too old to fuck with cell phones, so he wasn't discovered until until late that night when I heard his calls off the back porch. He says that the stilt walker arrived about an hour after his fall when he was growing too weak to push the cattle away from his side of the bale. He said that it approached the bale and stood directly over him, taking huge chomps from the bale but preventing the livestock from crushing him. So whatever it is omnivorous and seems to recognize and even act benevolently in the event that something on the farm is endangered aside from the chickens. Part of the reason I've grown to respect it and stop trying to prove we have a cryptid the government needs to sample or anything. He said it smelled very yeasty, like it was fermenting sourdough in its long, coarse hair. He's literally 98 though, so who knows? Another person shares, back in the 1990s, northern Arizona, my uncle told me a story about a skinwalker he claims he saw. His story was pretty basic, usual stuff compared to today's stories. He was traveling on I-40 heading east, Flagstaff to Winslow at night. He stopped in Winslow to buy a beer, then heading south on I-87. This happened in the 1980s when drinking and driving was not a huge focus. He was pissed he had to travel to Sierra Vista for whatever army. He finished a beer, tossed it out the window. I guess littering was not a huge focus either. He sensed something outside his window but ignored it. For a few seconds, finally, he looked out the window and saw a stilt walker-like entity running along the side of the lonely road. He claims it wasn't really running, but more like floating or gliding along, keeping a pace for a few heartbeats before retreating into the darkness. His story is pretty vanilla compared to stilt walker stories in the age of the internet. The trope of it running alongside the vehicle is common today, but remember this was back in the early 1980s when stilt walkers were basically unheard of. Le Loan, also known as the ghost of Molles, is said to be a humanoid figure haunting the forest near the Swiss town of Molles. He wears a gimp suit and a gas mask. The nature of its appearance makes one wonder if it is a mysterious creature, an urban legend, or simply someone who likes to dress up and wander around. For 10 years, the Swiss town of Molles has been terrified by this strange figure lurking in the woods. Police have been looking for him since the first encounter. He has been walking the same path through the woods for a decade, stalking the town from the bushes. There is a photograph attributed to Le Lion depicting a strange human figure. However, it has not been proven whether this photo is a hoax or not. The witness who managed to capture the being on camera said, "I ran into him near the marshes. I got within 10 meters of him. He was wearing a military coat, boots, and gas mask. I think the old kind. He is over 6.5 feet tall. He looked at me and turned and quietly left." Mary Ann Desaclue, who lives in the neighborhood, told the local newspaper of her encounter. It was a rainy Sunday. He had a cap, a black coat, and a gas mask. What could be going on in his mind? I don't know, but it was unforgettable and unpleasant. I hope I don't see him again. Apparently, the creature known as Le Lion took his life. His clothes were found in the woods with the cryptid note reading, "The risk of a hunting for the beast." He wrote a letter in which he accused the town of taking the life of a harmless creature by revealing its existence. The risk of a hunt for the beast became too great. The letter expressed Le Lion's concern that the recent exposure would lead to increased attention, causing the person under the suit to give up going for walks, which the letter called happiness therapy. There is no feasible understanding of the being's true fate. It was also a mystery if it was truly no longer alive or merely in hiding. The letter reads, "Not only are you a moron, but you are above all an assassin. You took the life of a very harmless being who found in his walk a real therapy of happiness, allowing him to calm from the responsibilities and the changes of his normal life, which he did have some. The ghost cannot explain this happiness, but you do not seem to know. You will discover that it takes everything to make a world. Then you are an assassin of freedoms. To hear you, we will find ourselves in the Middle Ages, at the time of the witches. Why don't you rise up against the little toads, helmets and hoods dressed in letters who backfire on their motorcycles in these same forests? They are in violation. Do they take the time to meditate in front of the chapel to ask for a better word? I terrorize children. Make me laugh. Why are they not terrified by the horrors and the crimes that are very real that they see on television? Who is in charge of the tolerance and freedom one has in this world? These beautiful notions benefit more dealers, pimps, burglars, and hooligans. Switzerland is small. Anything that is not in accordance with the garden gnome must be eradicated. I thought during these years, while I was almost left alone until you, that these feelings were involving. You give me the opposite proof. Unfortunately, the phantom disappears. The risk of the beast hunt is too great. It will come back to haunt the narrow minds of your kind, for ultimately a ghost never dies." What an odd letter and an odd individual. Though there is nothing wrong with being odd, it just makes someone interesting.